how it goes. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the Islamic Psychology podcast, where we are discussing issues of concern relating to being Muslim, Islamic psychology, finding, I guess, coherence in the modern, postmodern world, and welcoming different guests within the psychology sphere, but maybe from philosophy and other academia, to talk about important concepts and to provide a platform for a free flow of ideas that are nonpartisan. I have with me, I'm honored to have Dr. Azadeh Weber, who's a doctor of psychology. She's a homeschooling mom. She's a permaculture farmer, and I'm just delighted to have you on the show, Dr. Azadeh. And please, let us know what you're doing.
Thank you, Sister Fazia. It's an honor to be here today with you. So I would just like to say that what I'm doing is out here, well, I'm homeschooling foremost, so I'm networking around that. And I found some families out here that are interested or are already homeschooling, alhamdulillah. And I'm also like organizing, gatherings and community building out here around art and around permaculture experiences, because I feel that these are some areas that, I could fill some gaps. Fortunately, some of the sisters out here, they have like already been organizing events around things like Islamic learning, even indigenous cooking, so we gather around these different topics, and it's really nice, and I really like being part of the sisterhood out here. So I just try to fill gaps where I can. What else I'm doing out here is well, I like to get kids around animals and connection with the land. Some of the areas that I see as like markers of good health are in like in a heart that's like pure and healthy is creativity. A pure heart is creative. A pure heart has a thirst for learning. And I also feel that when the heart is healthy, there is and I'm not saying pure because no one's 100% pure, but when you're in the direction of moving towards a healthy heart, these are some of the markers I see. Also, I feel that there's a connection to the land and the animals, and wherever you can connect to something that's living, that living thing, whether it's a tree or a person or animal, that has the divine and internal spark in it. And so I feel that, making that connection really helps the individual in their own heart and psychology.
Yeah, what you bring up is fascinating. Like I've been trying to figure out for myself and kind of define like how is, you could say, this is kind of like a new subject. I know there's been different writers on this, Dr. Malik Badri, Dr. Lale Bakhtiar, and other like forerunners, Muslims who noted that psychology, like from a Muslim perspective, can be like more holistically understood. And so what you're telling me is that, there are aspects of us, like how would you understand Islamic psychology, and how psychology can be kind of a bit more wholesome and heart-centered for Muslims today, because we're just kind of coming to the realization that, well, we need to attend to our psychology. Like, we can have, like previously people would be very reluctant to go and ask help and, or find a new way of being and living to kind of deal with some of the challenges that we're facing. So
well, first of all, I wouldn't say that this is Islamic psychology. I would say that it is psychology, and that Islamic culture has a good handle on it. That's what I would say.
Oh, that's a good way of looking at it, mashallah.
Anyways, yeah, that's what I'd say. So, I would say that first of all, but we'll just for purposes, just make it easy. We'll call it Islamic psychology, and I would say that first thing that stands out to me is that there's not a dualistic part. Um, there's not dualism in the human being. So in the West, when we think of psychology, we think about mind body dualism, right? And we think that psychology is, that we have like the medical fields, like the traditional medical fields that deal with the body, and then we have psychology, right? And this is the medical sciences and the health sciences of the psychology, and this is a dualistic split, right? So I would say that in Islamic psychology, indigenous psychology, there is not this split.
Yeah.
There is, this notion that everything is connected. And that's why, I feel that there's so much psychological healing in connection to, the land and doing in the animals and doing embodied things like artwork is a very embodied thing. You feel the weight of the pen or the kalam or the paintbrush, whatever you're using, or you feel the pottery in your hand and how you sit, and your posture determines the quality of your artwork. So this is a very embodied experience, and I feel this connection as a person is expressing the contents of their personality into their creative medium. I feel that this is very healing because it's bringing things back together.
Mhm. This is
I hope that
fascinating.
answers the question for you.
Oh yeah, no, you did. I have more from what you're sharing because when we speak about embodiment, like it's clearly it's something that we need. And then what that means is that we might be somehow disembodied. And I'm curious to know like where that maybe sense of schism or not being connected with the body or to the outer world, like where that comes from. That might be like a really big question, but clearly it's there. Like we're we're needing to seek connection somehow and integration, right? Or reintegration. And I'm wondering like what are some of the things that we're being challenged with? Especially I guess I'm asking as a parent. I have children and I would want them to have like a really healthy embodied sense of being in the world. But
Okay.
clearly there are like lots of things that we're feeling, kids are feeling, schools might be feeling, communities, the Muslim community in the mosques, like it's a big thing. But I think what you're talking about, like this embodiment of really being here and overcoming that dualistic understanding of the self seems to be key.
Mhm. So I'll try to chip away at this. There's a lot to be said on this topic. Some things that come up to my head. Oh, and by the way, like my background in psychology, more than half of it was just dealing with when I was, practicing. More than half of it was working with children. So I'm going to kind of speak from that experience. I did later move on, like the last 3 years, to work with adults and couples, but most of the time I was, uh, over half the time I was my clinical experience, I was working with children. So with children, I see like I'll start with them. I'll see that disembodiment happens. I want to say like video games and technology is one way that disembodiment starts to take root pretty early. It's not the only way, but when a person is playing video games, they start using their head, um, and in a way that's disconnected from their five senses. So I feel that this is like a way of a disembodiment. Like, so they start using your head to strategize to get through the level, to I don't know, yeah, pretty much to get through the level. And what they're doing is they are not using their sense of smell. They're not using their their sense of what would be another sense they're not using? I mean, they're using visual and audio for sure,
Right.
but
Yeah,
they're
it's
not.
more head centered. Like what you're saying is it's just so much more cognitive based. Like it's just more like they're not smelling, touching, tasting, walking around, like their feet aren't feeling the floor, walking around. It's such a virtual space. So it's like they're virtually like mentally connected, but physically disconnected.
Hmm. And then the way that they are using their senses is, they're using their visual and audio senses in a very disconnected way. So what they're doing is they're focused on the screen. They don't have peripheral vision or peripheral
Oh,
audio. So you know, um, when I'm out in nature, and I live in a place where there's predators out here. There's moose, there's wolves, sometimes coyotes, cougars. So when I'm out walking around, I have to have peripheral vision. I
mhm.
have to have peripheral audio. I have to pick up, like, I might be walking with someone and talking to them and listening, but I'm also listening to everything that's going around me. And I'm also like aware, trying to be as aware as possible of everything going around me as I'm like, connecting to the earth and to my experience in that moment. But when a kid is playing video games, they're not listening to what's going on in their room, right? Or what's going on in their immediate environment. They're just very focused, like a specialist would be focused in
Wow.
in, in a field. And so I feel that this is like a problem, um, even when I'm dealing with myself. So
Yeah, so this would kind of like I'm wondering where, there's the saying, oh, we have collective tunnel vision, or we have collective, or like we have a myopic vision of the world. Like it seems like really narrow and hyper specialized, hyper focused. And just a couple of things came to mind as you were sharing. Um, I was listening to a lecture by someone, and they were talking about how that on a material level we have these five senses, but that they're actually on a spiritual level there's even more senses. So if we're kind of disconnected from even the basic physical ones, I wonder how we have access to even the metaphysical ones. And
yeah,
this is something that I'm like looking into investigating because Mevlana Rumi, Sheikh Ibn al-Arabi, Imam Ghazali, like they've spoken about other senses, but it's like we don't know we're here, but we're like and we're not fully here. And this hyper specialized, hyper focused view, it kind of brings up some of this. I think he's a neuropsychiatrist or like a psychiatrist, Ian McGilchrist. I'm not sure if you've heard of his works or seen anything by him.
I'm not familiar.
Okay, yeah. So he was talking about what you were saying essentially, but from a different perspective. And he talks about how we're divided, how we're and which is what you were saying, that we're we're in a we're living kind of like a dual reality where one part is really hyper connected, is tunnel focused, and then the other part is disconnected. The other part, probably it sounds like either it's the same size or importance, or in fact even more important, right? Like what would you say, like like how important is having like this hyper specialized thinking compared to like a more embodied way of being, and how much greater is that?
Well, my heart really goes out to people these days because I feel like their minds, and are being exploited by the financial system. Um,
Oh,
because like people have to, it's really hard to succeed at some level, or sometimes, I mean, in a professional industrial sphere without specializing in something, because these are the people who are getting the rewards of society. So we're kind of in this little conundrum, like how to kind of live in both worlds, right?
mhm.
So how to walk that line between both worlds where you are capable of going deep into something, but you're also capable of being aware that there's so much more out there, and that this, whatever you're going deep into, is just like a drop in the ocean, right? Um, so yeah, that's my thoughts off the top of my head on the specialization thing. Um, Adults, I think, get specialized because at least probably for the past like 100 years since like the Renaissance or the Enlightenment period, or I'd say the Enlightenment period, people have been taught that like to be like educated is to have this mind body split. Like,
Oh,
so if I go and I'm working in a professional sphere, like I have to almost shut down my emotions in order to like have like the right response. I think this is a pressure that some people feel. And then what happens is they might succeed and get the good job and the money for that, but it really hurts them on a personal psychological level,
yeah.
um, because that split that they're doing to themselves. So I do feel people are being exploited. Their minds are being exploited by financial
Yeah,
systems.
it sounds like material success comes at a spiritual, personal, psychological cost, right? Like, because it sounds like, to succeed materially, we kind of need to cut off a part of ourselves or, knowing a part of ourselves more fully to have that success, like this is something that I struggle with as a parent because, I want to see my children succeed, but I want to see them happy, and happy at what they're doing, and also come to know who they are and find meaning in the world, and just kind of share their talents, which not might not be rewarded in a particular kind of worldview and framework when and then I kind of wonder like are we providing I guess as a community and society opportunities for new ways of doing things for the younger generation having an opportunity to do more than just satisfying basic material needs and I guess communicating the need to pursue higher learning for higher learning's sake, like learning meaning that it's more qualitative rather than quantitative, right?
Mhm.
Um,
Right. Yeah, you do see a lot of people who will go and they will go get educated because they want a good job, right? And it seems like so many people have that approach to learning. You know, when it's like to me the unhealthy approach. It should be a qualitative way, like you know, um, curiosity and lifelong learning is a sign of a healthy heart, and kind of view it that way. I also share the same sentiments and as you about children, being a mother myself, and the thoughts that I have had on it are like, what are some career paths for my children that they could have that are going to, um, maintain like, foster integrity and wholeness in them. And so like some of them, I think that um, that have come to my mind are, well, naturopathic health, you know,
right.
indigenous psychology. I would say even, and I'm going to call it indigenous art,
Mm. Hmm.
and I would say architecture, even I would say business in a way, if it's, as long as it's halal, can be holistic because a business person doesn't just focus on one vertical. They expand to all subjects. Like it could be like pairing with an artist to help that artist become like more materially or successful fiscally,
Hmm.
or or even pairing with a scientist, but they have that range where they would know like a little bit about like all these things. Also builders, I
Right.
think are people who work in like forestry,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
the marine biologist maybe, or something like that. I
Mm.
think these are some fields of study that one can still have a sense of holism with.
Maybe private schools, being teachers in a private school where, like people, like we kind of come together, I guess in a way that, like I really admire two institutions that are doing like amazing things, at least from what I know from my basic knowledge in North America, but they're higher institutions and, but it's like it seems like a community effort where we all kind of come together from wherever we are at and really support a project that creates opportunities, places of learning, and also like businesses that would provide jobs where this would be valued. Institutions where like a person that's more grounded in these realms would actually find a home and an income, like, and be valued in. So the two institutions that I was talking about are like, but they seem to be like more kind of academic, social sciences type institutions or theology schools, Cambridge Muslim College and Zaytuna. Um, and definitely there is a little bit of a difficulty for children who pursue academics along that route to find a job later on. But it seems so important qualitatively, like it's almost it's almost like either you choose more quality, or if you focus on quantity, you'll be struggling for the rest of your life finding quality again. you know, um, there's this really interesting quote by this one writer. Her name is Kathleen Rain. She says that I spent 4 years learning essentially, I'm paraphrasing, 4 years learning in a university to spend the rest of my life to undo those. you know, and it's somewhat tragic statement. And she's a Western philosopher. So like not even in the Muslim community, and she's seeing this. And so like, that like, so they're serving us to get an income, but then we have to spend the rest of our life as a human being rediscovering ourselves and undoing all of that. So that's a huge schism, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a process. Academia is hard. Is in At least in I had a hard time with it. I think that there's a lot of pressure from. I mean, there's like an pretty much to me. It seems like there's a liberal agenda, and there's not room to question it so much. And I feel that core faculty that's brought in tends to have to agree with that, and they might let 2 or 3 degrees of like difference in, but ultimately you can't radically oppose you know some of the stuff, so that's hard.
Yeah, I think this is kind of one of my main interests in starting this, because these are real issues that play out in so many different realms: education, psychology, like overall general health, policy and politics, institution building, and even then nation building. So this has like broad implications. And so kind of my concern, like I guess about starting this show, was to, provide a forum and a platform for thinking about things in a fresh way, uh, where we're actually not closed off from thoughts, that we're not kind of engaging in a culture that wants to include thoughts, that doesn't simultaneously uh, cut off thinking that actually might be fresh, creative, valuable, but and also at the same time traditional, like from the best of the past. Because like I hear your concerns, because I hear a lot of Muslim university students really struggling. They're struggling with their faith, they're struggling to find meaning, they're feeling like really like alienated, lost, and they're like, well, what do I do? Especially after the pandemic, right? A lot of things were shook up, and they're looking to find wholeness again. And subhanallah, like I think that just a kind of worldview that doesn't negate our whole sense of self seems to be at the bare minimum needing to be at the table to kind of to just be acknowledged and understood, and then developed. And I think institutions are doing this and people are talking about it, but it's so important to have a place where Muslims can speak freely and not be labeled a liberal progressivist, or a conservative, right-wing supporter, and all of these things, that we have to kind of transcend this spectrum where we're dividing each other. And if we're truly going to be inclusive, that means that you have to discuss ideas and bring them to the surface, where you're not cutting people down or negating them or canceling them. Cancel culture is such a big problem now.
It's not just that about labeling. I mean, labeling is something I could deal with,
Yeah,
but it's actual backlash. And I would say that, if you were to stand up and say something like, well, hey, this line of thought actually like cancels out like a good portion of like, my experience, or like, invalidates like, good chunk of like my culture, and so how do you deal with like opposites,
yeah,
like you you can't always say like, oh, these things are opposite, so we're gonna come together with a happy medium. Like in opposites, like you actually have to say like, no, one is right, one is wrong. You can't just always compromise in that
right,
conflict resolution. And there has to be space for that in academia, where, you're not I'm not always feeling like I have to like compromise and dilute myself in order to stay involved. Sometimes like I'm going to win and sometimes the other party's going to win, right? But, there has to be room for like, this is right and this is wrong. Everything
right.
can't be, subjective. And, so when everything's, when everything is like a subjective truth, like, then it seems like the next thing would be to compromise and like, okay, we're both right then. But no,
Yeah.
that's not always the case.
Yes, because then you'll actually end up canceling each other out.
Yeah.
Like like in mathematics and algebra, like like you there has to be some kind of discernment. We know that just very basically from our faith, and the Quran is called a criterion. But this just tying it back and to maybe wrap up, and I would love to continue this conversation with you on other topics. This is like a big topic, and I really wanted to give women a voice in this, and really start talking about these issues from a real, like, somewhat academic, but from a real world lived experience, because we're in such intense times of change and flux, and it seems like the ground is sometimes shifting under our feet before we can really stabilize and stand firmly on the ground. But that's the thing, though, is that discernment and having kind of a more objective standing, as opposed to being constantly in polarity and constantly being, um, uh, I guess divided. Like having some kind of objective stance might give some um,
Mhm.
stability to us. And so when you were talking about senses earlier, like I'm thinking now, it's like, does the Quran speak about a sense? Is it a feeling sense? Is it a thought sense? But of spiritual discernment, right? Of discernment between right and wrong. Like we do have to identify things that are not good for us and things that are good for us. The thing that we think might be good for us might have limited goodness. Like it might be good on one level, but not fully so on other levels. So like even though, like, say, the example of the video game, well, video games are fun and entertaining, and but they have a limited space and sphere. They might be cathartic for a little while, but if they're training you into a tunnel vision where all your reality is generally like you're being trained and honed to only think in a particular way, to have a myopic or tunnel type vision, no periphery, then that'll be like kind of a challenge. If we're all only thinking that way, we won't be able to see the bigger picture. But I wanted to wrap up and give you like your final thoughts, and then have you on this podcast again.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate it, Fozzie. I would love to be back again. Thank you for giving me the platform and space to share some thoughts. My final thought would be that, until like the indigenous voices, the Islamic voices, the indigenous Islamic voices can be, part of the conversation. When we look at like what kind of therapies are coming out of like the field of psychology, like we have to even raise the question: are these therapies creating um, division, right? Like, am I being asked to talk about my traumas in a way that's going to perpetuate dualism? Or am I being able to just like talk about my emotions and my thoughts, in a way that perpetuates the fact that my mind is separate from my body? Or am I, talking about my experiences and my traumas in a way that's going to bring things back together? And I know there's, scientific studies out there that say that, like, for example, CBT, you know, pro brings healing to this population, so and so. And while that may have some truth to it, I'm just what maybe that's because that person was 100% of themselves might have been like in the dark about this experience. So if I let half of myself in the, become aware of half of myself, of course you're going to see some like healing there, short term. But, what about like a therapy that integrates the whole person so that, instead of just stepping like one foot out, into awareness of what their experience, their whole personhood steps out. I hope I'm not like being too confusing there, but
No, not at all, but it's definitely like it's speaking to me. The language of symbolism that you're using too, just to figure this out, because we're talking kind of also about a metaphysical aspect of us that we can't fully see, but and then there's the physical aspect that we also don't fully see. And then just kind of unpacking all of this, that who we are, especially with changing definitions of who we are, with algorithms, chat GPT, all this technology, which I'd just love to have a show on technology with you. That, are we just a fancy algorithm, that can be mimicked, and it's as good as us, So like these are big questions, but I we'll have this again, and it's really exciting. Even though some of what we're talking about is a little bit disturbing, but I feel really hopeful that once we start talking about it in a way that's really loving and respectful, that we'll get through a lot of things together, especially for the sake of our children.
inshallah.
Inshallah, inshallah. Okay, well, thank you so much, and take care. Many prayers for you and your family, and we'll speak again.
My
Thank you.
pleasure. You're welcome. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for joining us.